Okay, so we're going to build a coffee table all made out of framing lumber from whether it be Home Depot or a lumber yard where I get my 2x12s. I get usually fir or pine. And the 2x3 framing pieces will be made from Idaho Prime from Home Depot, which to me, if you can find good pieces in the stack, it's a nicer lumber for pine since it's a little denser, nicer grain, a little heavier type of wood. It looks a little better too. But I prefer to use other hardwoods. But for projects like this, these are popular. These rustic farmhouse type tables, and people seem to like these this style. So we're gonna start with the Idaho prime pine here. We're gonna cut down on the miter saw the lengths. The rough dimensions are going to be 36 long, 19 to 20 inches wide, and 18 inches high. So let's start cutting all the legs up now. Then we're going to start with the stretchers and aprons. Okay, so as you see, we start with the miter saw here. We're going to cut the legs up. This is the Idaho Prime. These are 2x3s. Again, from Home Depot. Like I said, it's not the most preferred type of wood, but for Home Depot wood, this is probably their nicer wood, in my opinion. If you can find it, not every Home Depot has them. They have them near me, and you got to really pick through the stack. Sometimes it could take me, half hour to 45 minutes to go through the whole stack to find the pieces I want. I know it's not great to do that, but I always put everything back, and I usually go early in the morning or later in the evening when there's not as crowded, so I don't take up the whole area there. And most people don't seem to use this; they seem to be in the 2x4 section. So anyway, so we cut the legs. They're going to be 17 inches in length. With the top will come out to 18. This is the top's going to be roughly an inch thick, a little more. And these are the stretchers here. And the aprons, which will be 31 inches from the fronts and the backs, the tops and bottoms, and the sides are going to be roughly 16 inches. So any pieces that especially for the stretchers and aprons that have like knots or imperfections, we either mill up with the planer and joiner, or we'll keep on the inside so they're not exposed. So we'll keep the nicer pieces, sides showing. So, and you'll see as we start to put this together, we'll kind of like get everything set up and lined up. So the lumber being used, like I said, is going to be an Idaho Prime 2x3s for the framing pieces. They're going to be using 2x12 for the top. They're using a 1x8 for the bottom pieces. I also get them Home Depot. I think they're about $15 a piece. So I needed two pieces. That was roughly about $30, and the 2x12 was about $20, and the 2x3s I needed, I think it was five, and they were like $3 a piece, roughly 250. Um, so it's not a whole lot of money all in, maybe $50, $60 all in, even with the fasteners, paint, stain, if you decide to do that. So now we're at the joiner. We're going to just get, these are fairly straight, if they're not bowed. So we're just going to get one straight edge and one straight face, and then run it to the planer, and then just kind of get them lined up before we go to the table saw later. But we really don't have to do too much of a table saw for these pieces. But the other pieces later, we will use a table saw. So now I'm looking for the best sides. So the sides that aren't as nice, we're going to use pocket holes here. This is going to be you know, I don't want to say easy build, but an easier build. This is geared towards the beginner build people. And this is my cheaper line of furniture. I wouldn't say, but it doesn't mean it's not built good. And I build the best quality I can, but this is furniture on a budget, we'll call it. And we try to keep it, nice, but also realistic. And, you know, I turn these over pretty quick, these orders. Okay, so this part here, I'm going to just run a chamfer on each edge, exposed as this is a test piece first, just to make sure that we're dialed in. We're going to use this little cheap router table here, and I like to put a chamfer or round over on each edge to give it a nice clean look, especially with the reveals. Um, and you could also use a trim router if you have one, or a laminate router. Just put a chamfer or round over, like I said. You can push your tool through, or you can push your material through the tool, depending on how you want to do this. Either way works. I had the router table out, so I just figured I would just use it real quick. Makes it a little bit safer, a little easier, but not, but the regular handheld router is fine also. So either way you could do it. Okay, so then we're going to sand every frame piece here after the router table, 80 grit. We're obviously going to sand again later. So now we're at the part where we're going to start getting ready for assembly, and we're going to use these little spacers here, as you see I had on my hands. These are going to be used to create our reveal, and as you see, I'm pointing out the chamfer here. I want that facing bottom because I want all soft edges exposed. This is the bottom. I'm sorry, the top piece for the stretcher, and we're going to just lay these out. We're going to just use glue and clamps to start out with. Then we will use the pocket screws later after the glue takes hold for a little bit so we don't move stuff off center. And, you know, sometimes if you over tighten or, you know, the glue can, if it's not holding, it can kind of pull your piece off. So you want to keep everything square. So we're just laying everything out that looks the best. We're going to, you know, do the best presentation here that we can. And we're just going to use, like I said, use some glue and some clamps and just put it together, and that then we'll come back in later with the pocket holes, screws. So you got to remember the pocket screws. The only negative, well, one of the negatives are besides being able to see your joinery, if you look underneath, is sometimes if you over tighten your screw, you can really move your piece and take everything out of square. So you got to be careful with that. So like I said, we're just going to use some glue and clamps to hold for a little bit, and then we're going to come back later and put the screws in. Okay, so building furniture or pretty much anything really just depends on your layout and your templates and everything. So here's you see I'm using spaces I use for my default spacing on the bottom stretchers and aprons. So I keep everything consistent, and it also speeds up your process as you start building your furniture. And this is mainly geared towards beginners or intermediate woodworkers. If you have your processes in place, it definitely speeds up your time to build things without cutting corners, and it keeps everything more consistent this way also. So I use a little wood spacers I use for my reveals, and also for my spaces for the bottom stretchers and aprons, and also I use like a little speed square here and regular squares just to make sure everything is consistent and square. So that's important. Just use some clamps, like I said, and glue here, and make sure everything's nice and tight and nice and square. And like I said, just keep everything consistent so you build consistent furniture, and that's very important. Okay, so I'm going to use the word square again. So we're going to measure across diagonally to make sure everything's nice and the same measurements. And I was off that 16th of an inch here. It's not a big deal, but to me, I just wanted to keep it a little tighter. So I'm just going to put a clamp across and just kind of tighten up a little bit, square it up a little better. And so now we're going to, and that was just a quick little tip there. If you ever have something that's square, you use your clamp to kind of knock it back in. Um, so now we're going to cut up our upside down V pieces. These are like little accent pieces. Instead of the X, I use an upside down V. And we're going to be using 2x3s for this also, to keep everything consistent. And we're going to get our measurements here and get our angle. And we're going to use the miter saw to cut our angles. And we're going to use glue and brad nails to fasten these. So my angle came at about 30 degrees. Now that can change depending on how the spacing you want for your upside down V's. So just keep that in mind. So um, I want mine to be not too tight, butt up against each other, because I got to have space to get in there to put the glue and brad nails in. So I try to keep about an inch gap so I can work a little bit, and just keeps it inconsistent with all my projects. So then we're just going to get, like I said, get our measurements, get it nice and tight. And then we're going to use stop block and another spacer to get consistent cuts. And that's what we're doing here. My cleat pieces too for the bottom shelf. So we need to have some way to hold these shelves, and I use cleats, either screw or brad nail the bottom shelves in. So we're going to start cutting everything up. So now we're going to run a chamfer on all these upside down V's to keep everything consistent with the rest of the build. So now here we are going to start measuring out our cleats. So these are just I'm going to put these in first. That's why I stopped with the upside down V's right now, because it's going to be easier for me to get my brad nailer in there to fasten these. So like I said, we're going to be using a stop block again and just cut these pieces. I'm going to only be using two, so this is fairly simple here. So you can see our common theme here. I have a little spacer piece here, which I use for all my templates, and I use that to as the thickness of my bottom shelf pieces. And I'm using 18 gauge brad nails to fasten these. And like I said, you can see the spacer there. It just keeps everything consistent and speeds up your process when you're building furniture. So now we're back onto the upside down V's. So we're going to sand everything down, smooth it up, and then we're going to use some glue and brad nails uh, to fasten these, make everything nice and consistent. And these come out really nice. It's a nice little touch, and customers seem to love this type of stuff, whether it be an X or a V or something like that. They like these little accent pieces. Okay, so now we're on to the top here. We got this big 2x12. We're going to cut this to the rough length. This will truly be a rough length, since we're going to have to trim it up later with a track saw or circular saw after lamination. So we're going to use a stop block, like I said, and which is, I try to, like I said, I can't stress this enough. Spacers, stop blocks, and templates keep everything consistent and speeds up your builds. So because your time is also got to be factored in these builds. So if it's taking you 8 to 10, 12 hours, and you want to charge, you know, $15 to $30 an hour, I mean, your tables have to sell for a lot more money. So you got to really speed up your process to make these worth your time. So like I said, we cut it up with the miter saw. We're going to take over into the jointer. Now I'm only going to do an edge here because we're just going to cut the rest with the table saw eventually. So the process pretty much stays consistent with the rest of the theme here. Miter saw, jointer, planer, and then table saw. So now we're just going to run these to the planer, get the not the final thickness, but the thickness before we laminate. So then we'll have to do everything with the hand planer and sander. So like I said, we're going to go to the table saw here, get our final width on these boards before we laminate. Okay, so now we have our final width and we have nice flush edges here, which is what you want to see, and that's due to your jointer and your table saw. So now we're going to mark where we're going to put our biscuits, but first we're going to start with the bottom shelves here. So I have to go out and get some biscuits. You don't need to use biscuits. I could have just laminated this, but I like to use biscuits or dominoes or dales just to line everything. But sometimes you get wood, especially from a box store, it's a little wonky. So these bottom shelves, we're just going to cut on the miter saw and the table saw, get our thick, our width and our length, and we're just going to place these in just to make sure everything looks good, and they do. So now let's move back onto the top. So we're going to be using biscuits. We got our biscuits in. So we're going to be using a biscuit joiner here. You do not need to do this. You could just laminate it with just glue. I like to use biscuits or dowels or dominoes just to keep everything aligned very well and give you a little bit more of a glue surface for glue up. But you don't, like I said, you could just use just laminate just with glue and clamps. But I like to use the biscuits. It's pretty fast and definitely helps keep everything kind of lined up, especially since we're using frame of lumber. It could be a little wonky. So we're just gonna, like I said, we're using glue, biscuits, and some light clamping pressure here to keep everything nice and flush. Okay, so I have the biscuit joiner. I'm going to use the biscuit joiner to put my little groove slots in the top stretchers and aprons, and that's going to be to hold our tops on with Z-clips. So you can also use a table saw or a router. I think this is probably the safest and easy way to do it. I do have videos showing you how to use a table saw, and I've also used a router in the past, but this is pretty easy. So now, like I said, we're onto the top. We're just cleaning everything up. We're just going to square everything up. I did run a hand planer because the wood was still not perfect, especially on some spots. So we just ran on a hand planer, and we're going to use some 80 grit to start, and then we're going to use the Traxel here to cut our final length on both sides here. So make sure everything's nice and square. You can see the guide. Then get a final measurement, and then final cut here. And also, you do not need the Traxel. You can use a circular saw with a straight edge. I've done that for years. Traxel, I have it, so I use it. You do not need a Traxel for this. So now we're starting to get towards the end of this project. I'm not going to get into the painting and staining part of this because this is mainly just construction and the build. So we're going to use some 80 grit sand in here, and then we're going to run a chamfer with a trim router here on each edge on the bottom and top, and then we're going to sand up to 120 grit with a finish sander. Also, you can see here I'm putting a little chamfer on the bottom of the feet here just to prevent from any kind of tear out. So we're just going to clean everything up now. Now it's a lot of sanding and pretty much finish up this project. Okay, so this project's pretty much completed now for at least what we're going to do here for the build. Everything's sanded, cleaned up. We're going to mount the top with the Z-clips we talked about earlier. After we get our final space in here, we're going to just kind of lay it out. I just brad now the bottom shelves in since we're going to be staying in that. So we're going to use a little speed rollers here to get our space in, and that's a good way to make sure everything's nice and consistent. And we're going to just hand tighten um, the screws in for the Z-clips. We do a little bit of a pre-drill, just very slight with self-center drill bit, and then I just kind of screw them in, hand tighten them. Especially with pine. So this project's pretty much done. It came out very nice, I think. Nice and clean for pine furniture. Like I say, you don't need to go out and spend most money. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.